How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to another episode of Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask that titular question. Because when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane?
This week we're taking some time at the end of the year to talk about one of our favorite releases in 2024, Hundreds of Beavers 2022. And there's no better way to celebrate the holiday season than with the homecoming of friends and family. So we're also joined by my dear friend and Parker's Aud Brother, Wil Cowser. Wil, thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Stoked to have you. Always good to talk with you.
A two-timer.
A two-timer,
A two-timer?
Yeah. You are the annual visit. You're the annual guest. We have to have the Aud Brother on once a year.
And you came on twice last year.
Yeah. That's true.
For those not in the know, in the intro I say it's one of our favorite releases in 2024, but the year it was made is 2022. That's because this movie, it really got its wide release in January of this year, but it started going to festivals in 2022. Parker and I previously agreed on this until he betrayed me. But you can go either way. So actually it's not betrayal, it's just a difference of opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, Wil, why did you want to bring this to the show?
Because it is the movie we just keep watching.
Yeah, that's true.
It really is goofs per minute, just up there with the best of them.
Mm-hmm.
A real Looney Tunes pace. It's one of the greatest comedies ever made, and it is like maybe the most artistically inspiring movie I've ever watched.
Totally.
At least recently, and a lot of the movies we talk about on here, like Jaws, was the last one.
Mm-hmm.
That's up there. This is up there with those for me in a direction that I've never seen ever before in my life. The weirdest movie that I legitimately thought wasn't possible to make.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I've felt similar. I was so excited to show you this because Max and I caught this at the Broadway in Salt Lake earlier this year. There was I think they were showing it one night. It was hey, come and see it. This is night that's showing, and it was packed. It was pretty much sold out, I think, if I remember correctly, and I've not been able to stop thinking about it. And then it came out on VOD, and I was like, "Will, you got to watch this movie." So I was thrilled that you took to it the way that I did.
Parker,
what about you, Max?
When we went and saw this, did we go together or did we just find each other there?
I think I told you about it. I think we found our other friends there.
Yeah, but we didn't go together.
Did we not?
No, I think you were like, "Hey, this is showing," and I was like, "Yeah, that sounds cool." But I'd also heard about it previously. If we're going to talk about our histories of the film, which is what we do with this section of the film, of the show, I heard about it. I think I heard about it from my friend Brogan, and then you were like, "I'm seeing this at the Broadway," and I went, "Yeah, I'm for sure going."
Gotcha.
And Brogan totally is a real person that you know.
He is a future guest of the show. And I was actually just on his podcast, and that episode will be coming out later this December, so I'll plug it on our next episode. But
a guy named Brogan has a podcast? Get wrecked, Brogan.
Light him up.
He's one of our loyal
Thanks for
listeners.
listening.
Glad to have your ears, Brogan.
Quick shout out to Brogan. I'm sure he's laughing right now. But yeah, Hundreds of Beavers, really good movie. Saw it at the Broadway, like Parker said, and then I didn't revisit it until the three of us watched it yesterday, with a gaggle of friends, and that was my second time watching it. And I was really nervous going in because seeing it in a theater was one of the great movie-going experiences of my life, for sure, of just I had never been to a comedy in a theater like that. Like, and I think that's mainly just a result of a lot of comedies don't get made anymore, and when they do, they go to streaming. But like, it's just a straight comedy. You know, like last time Will was on the show, we talked about Barbie. And that's a comedy, but it also has other things going on. And this is just like a straight comedy. On top of that, it is a slapstick silent film comedy made for $150K.
Yeah.
So actually, you've never seen anything like this in a theater or anywhere, except maybe like I'm curious to get your guys' opinion on this. And there are quotes from the research that I did as well. I'm curious if you found these as well, Parker. But is this like the true crossover point from like, I don't know, like, is this the end result of YouTube poop viral video, like internet humor is like, it's actually in a slapstick comedy film now? And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, because oftentimes people say internet humor with a tone of derision.
Sure.
But like, there is basically a meme in this movie, right? In the sense that a visual language that was determined by internet use, which that being the math crossing over someone's face, which obviously is, I'm not saying that starts on the internet, but just that's what that's an allusion to, for sure, right?
Right.
Is this kind of like a major crossing over point for like internet humor into film that doesn't feel like it was backed by some studio executive in a cringe way?
It really helps that it's not a movie about internet humor
Yeah,
Yes,
totally.
that's very true.
in any way. It predates the internet, but does not even try to pretend like the internet does not or never existed, and triples down on the fact that everyone who's watching it, yeah, they know what's funny. What is the best thing about this movie are the two things you hit on, of like, it's a genuinely inspirational film to me in that it shows the clearest way forward for the movie theater experience as a surviving art form, because like movie theaters were kind of made for B movies, or at least that's where they will continue to exist. And because you don't get a shared communal experience really when you're going and seeing The Conclave in a movie theater,
Yeah.
because it's about hearing other people and seeing them and being aware of the other people in the room that you're in. And this movie, with the internet culture, with the YouTube poop, is just so aware of who the people are that are sitting in the seats and watching it and what their points of reference are. It is so targeted.
Very much
in
so.
that way.
I was thinking about that while we were watching this yesterday, of like, we watched this with a bunch of our friends who were all, 20-somethings. And I think all movies have a target audience in mind, but, the stuff you see in movie theaters across the nation are always going to be the large 4-quadrant, like, hey, mass appeal. This needs to be marketable to everybody. And I was thinking about this movie, and I was like, I genuinely think there's something in here for people of all ages, and yet this is so firmly for our generation. Like, I could show this to my parents, and I think they would have a really good time with it, and they would find it very funny and enjoyable. But there are levels of, like, we all laugh when he walks up to the trader spot, and it just plays a, copyright-free version of the Zelda Bazaar music. And we all chuckle because we all know what that is. And I think, like, those kinds of oblique references would go past, people like my parents. And I do fully agree with what you're saying of, like, this movie knows the kinds of people that are sitting in that audience. And Max and I talk about it all the time on here, the kind of idea that you coined, Will, of like, does the filmmaker love their audience? And I fully feel like this filmmaker loves their audience so much.
Which is why indie film matters so much and is so important to the continued survival of the movie theater. And I keep bringing this up just because maybe the most interesting thing about this movie, other than it's the funniest movie ever, is that it's had this really sustainable financial business model of being made dirt cheap and then touring around like a vaudeville show
Yeah.
to theaters around the country with the filmmakers, getting really limited, focused, packed screenings, touring around like a comedy show. But this also means that it's coming from the point of view of when you're making a comedy and you're asking yourself, what's funny? In this movie, what do we decide is funny? And the answer for them is whatever me and my friends think is funny,
I'm
which
so
is a
glad
way
you
more
said
real. But, well, it's just because a studio comedy is trying to think of what will the most people find at least a little bit funny. But just crunching the numbers, like it's a more focused audience, and it's so worth mentioning for a low budget, big studio superhero movie. If they made a $150 million movie, which is kind of small these days, right?
Mhm.
You could make 1,000 of these movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
1,000.
Not hundreds of movies,
Yeah.
thousands of movies.
I'm so glad that you brought up, Will, that, and I want to talk about that last point as well. But I'm really glad that you brought up that the reason this works is because it's two friends who've known each other since they were kids saying, okay, well, what do we think is funny? It just so happens that they fall into a specific generation, right? Of, probably 30s, 20s, 30s, like 20 to 30 years ago, probably it's when they were born. And that means that this movie is way more in keeping with what a large chunk of the population will understand than what a lot of studio meddled broad, for demographic comedies will do, because those are, in trying to reach more people, they get more watered down almost from what would otherwise be funny, if that makes sense. And I don't want to fully commit to saying that. Like, if someone's like, that doesn't make any sense, I go, well, whatever, okay. But I do think that is, I agree with that idea. And I also think something that is interesting, especially with comedy, because I think that comedy in the United States is in a weird spot as far as just in like movies, like film comedy is in a weird place, because nowadays comedy is within blockbusters, or on a rare occasion it's like an SNL alum gets to make a movie and it's Daddy's Home 2.
Yeah.
I don't know. And then you have indie comedies, like last year we have Bottoms, which is also like very specific and has a vision, and those are what we need more of. And I think what Hundreds of Beavers is really showing is that, yeah, you can have a super niche, pretty cheap movie, especially if Hollywood isn't going to make a mid-budget movie anymore. Okay, DIY budget then. We're doing it ourselves. And there's this quote that I think is really interesting from the director. Is his first name Mike? I only have his last name.
Yeah, it's Mike.
Cheslik. Okay, Mike Cheslik. Who says, if anything, this is what Instagram creators and TikTok creators are used to every day. In this case, he's talking about, we say that this shows how indie theaters and like the theater going experience can go going forward. And I think you're absolutely right, Will, because this movie, every week of this year, it has played in at least one theater. It has been in a theater in the country for almost 52 weeks. Like, it will have stayed in theaters for the whole year. It's just that it was never in more than like 33 at a time. But the only really problem with that is that this took a lot of energy and it took a lot of time to just tour this thing around. So they talk about how they kicked it off with this road show, and they just needed to prove to theaters that people would show up. Besides just the movie, they'd bring the circus to town, is how they put it. And so they called it the Great Lakes Roadshow. This is how they kind of started taking it around. They rented out theaters and played it to mostly sold-out screenings in the Midwest. They didn't just play the movie, but created a vaudeville act to go along with it. The beaver mascot costumes came out of the closet. And that's when the producer, this is the producer whose name is Kurt Ravenwood. And he said, if anything, this is what Instagram creators and TikTok creators are used to every day. They both make the content and distribute the content via platform. If filmmakers want to reach an audience, they have to treat it like online creators treat it. And another quote here is, he says, I hope people can stop shooting things to make them look like commercials and just get back to more of the nitty-gritty and letting your imagination flow. And this is actually Ryan Erickson Cole Tews? Is that it? Ryland, right? Is that his first name?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, Tews said that. He stars and he also co-wrote the movie. And he says, I just hope we stop bowing down to Hollywood and thinking they're the gold standard, because they just aren't. And this is the main point I wanted to say. You still can do whatever you want, he says. No one's going to stop you if you take a phone and make a 90-minute timeline instead of a 30-second timeline. And I just think that's a very interesting point of, like, you can have these kind of more broad comedies or comedy in blockbusters, but, like, I would say some of the most effective comedy in the last 10 years has come from the internet and has come from YouTube, and people still quote Vines to this day, and that's where comedy culture is really taking shape in a lot of places. And just Twitter as a thing was where, like, most jokes came from. And I think that this is a very interesting point in comedy filmmaking, in that it's recognizing people are taking a lot of time and effort to consistently do social media content that's funny. And I really like that what he's saying here is, well, you can take your phone and just make a 90-minute movie instead.
And most people have made something funny for their Instagram story. Like, even if you are on the most slapstick level, like, even if you just happened to catch a video of your dad slipping on the ice and falling over, like, that is a comedy film.
Totally. No, I completely agree. It's very interesting, like, to both of your points, just looking at the way that they put this all together. There's a really amazing Ask Me Anything thread on Reddit from the filmmakers that I did a lot of deep diving into. And they talk about all this kinds of stuff of, something that I really loved was, somebody asked, like, where did the original idea come from? And Mike, the director, answered, he says, I can barely remember because it started as a bar talk. But he talks about this whole thing. He's like, I believe there's a subgenre of slapstick called snow stick. Includes cartoons like Donald Snow Fight and Abbott Costello and Hit the Ice. And we wanted to make the ultimate snow stick movie. And as they were writing it, they had a simple 2-page hero's journey treatment, and they had a bunch of note cards with visual gags, and they just kept moving them around on this timeline over the course of months and months and months of just like, well, let's move this gag here in the hero's journey. Let's move this gag over here. And they talk about, too, how, like, a big takeaway that they had is, they were saying that, for their advice for filmmakers and indie filmmakers is that, hey, like, you can always be working on the film. So they talked about how they teamed up with this ad agency in Milwaukee called SRH, who saw their previous film, Lake Michigan Monster, which was also made for almost nothing. And that marketing company said, an ad agency said, hey, we want to make a movie with you. They did all the marketing for the movie and helped them find investors. And some of them were people that they found. Some of them were just friends of Mike and Ryland, who thought this would be a fun thing to contribute to and be a part of. But they said, they're like, so even if money is trickling in slowly, you can always be doing something to move the film forward in production. And the nice thing about having these, the ad agency behind them and their investors is that they gave them as much time as they needed. So in total, the film took about 4 years to make, and 12 weeks of that was shooting. So the rest of it was just them letting money trickle in, working out what the story was going to be like, figuring out how they were going to do all of this, right? Because the director did, over 1,500 effect shots on his home computer for this, and just did that for like 2 years, basically. And it just like it's the point we keep circling around of just, this does feel like the most inspiring piece of filmmaking I've seen in ages, maybe ever, of just saying, okay, look, what matters fully is the core concepts of what you're working with and how you choose to present them, right? Because there was a different interview that I read with the director where he was talking about, he's like, yeah, like the choice to make this black and white silent and to put like the film grain and scratches on top, he said, that makes compositing so much more forgiving. Like this movie, I think would lose a lot of its charm and would look a lot cheaper if it was in color, which is so interesting because in a weird way, it is the digital equivalent to what people were working with film stock of, you make something black and white, it's cheaper. It is cheaper film stock physically to buy and develop than color. And so a lot of first-time filmmakers like Christopher Nolan are shooting in black and white because it's cheaper to do it. And I just thought that was so interesting that like even in a digital standpoint, there is something to be said about suspension of disbelief when you subtract the color from it.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting about a few things that have come up at this point is just that this film feels like the origin of film, like classic film technique of, film began silent. It began in slapstick in a lot of ways. And it began, like, a lot of the techniques weren't, like, in the same way that when we talk about a horror movie, Parker, on this show, we've talked about how horror movies are often where a lot of groundbreaking happens just because of the nature of how those are being made. Mm-hmm. In that, and hang on, let me get this whole thought together. Let me just finish the sentence on this episode. What I think, and what I'm going to posit here, and I know full well that you are both, master students of film.
Yes.
You teach it now. Here's what I'm going to say. I think that most of the major, like, groundbreaking that's happened in film history has happened on independent films, as we know, but also just, like, films made really cheap. A lot of the time. I'm not going to make that a 100% rule, but I think that is just where it kind of comes from, is just someone having an idea and going, can I do that? And they're going to go, and they go, well, I'm going to figure out how I can do that. And I think this movie is that concept of just, like, the oldest idea of what filmmaking is, paired with a look to the future that is based in, okay, we're going to, like, in distribution, we're going to look to content creators online, and because of the time that we grew up in, it's also going to make a lot of allusions to video games as an influence, and the internet as an influence. And I think that makes it a really unique product of film history and just culture in general.
Yeah, I completely agree. Any thoughts, Will?
My proudest called shot of my life was a few years ago, starting grad school, and just thinking about how the Marvel fatigue was starting to set in, and maybe superhero movies are on their way out, going the way of the Western. And the question is, what's next? And my guess was video game movies.
Mm-hmm.
And superhero movies aren't going nowhere, but video game movies are coming in hot. And this is one of those for sure, but in the weirdest way ever. In like sort of a, like the Ang Lee Hulk movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How that movie used comic book logic to present itself as a film and not just comic book narrative. This is not based off of a video game, but it does. At every point when they're making narrative decisions, they're asking themselves, if this were a video game, what would happen next? If this were a video game, how would the physics work? How far would I go when I jump? How dangerous is this fall? Which is just, you had mentioned the video games, which is fun. A thing that stood out to me on this watch is at the very end when this movie goes from Fur Trapper to Death Star Trench Run. And there's a very clear Mario Party bit.
Yeah.
And I know you've got a quote about that, Parker. But there's a very clear Mario Party bit where they're running on logs, which is such a video game thing to do, where they're like running backwards on a log trying not to fall over, and they have to jump over poles, and the one beaver jumps too early and gets wrecked by the pole.
Mm-hmm.
Is the visual gag that you would see in Mario Party that would make you and your friends cry on the floor. And so it is no longer, or not no longer, but this movie just doesn't look to other comedy films for a lot of inspiration, other than maybe that handful of Snow Stick.
Yeah.
But there is,
Yeah.
it's this line between originality of like nothing is new, but you also want to show people something they haven't seen before. And if a lot of your gags are just like the way funny things happen in video games, that's something we've all seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore understand it and therefore find it funny, but also something that we've never seen before in a movie, and it's all the more funny
Yeah.
and surprising.
I think I also want to say, jumping off of your point, Will, that video game in the sense of like late 90s, early 2000s, like Ocarina of Time, Mario Party 3 era of video game, right? But even earlier than that as well. But I feel like a lot of video games have started doing like a narrative, more cinematic kind of approach. But I do want to say this, keeping in mind those earlier games, that a video game is actually a really interesting thing to look at as far as how to simply structure your narrative, because a video game, especially in like an Ocarina of Time situation, in a Legend of Zelda situation, where your character doesn't talk, there is a lot of visual hand-holding in a way of like, okay, you're gonna get the hang of how this works and how this world works, and a video game kind of walks you through that, often with like a character who goes, here's how it works, but like mostly through the experience of playing it. And what I think this movie does really interestingly is it looks to that and it goes, okay, and maybe this wasn't intentional, but it looks at that and it goes, okay, let's apply that rule to film. Let's have repetition of the same things over and over again, making the ending of those bits like gags, right? Whereas if you were playing this as a video game, you would be like frustrated when you can't catch a fish, and you would try different things until you figure out what the development team wanted you to do. But this movie says, okay, but if you're not controlling it, what makes it interesting? It's comedy. And I also think it's interesting, Will, that you said this film doesn't look to other comedy films for its comedy outside of, slapstick humor, early cinema like Buster Keaton kind of vibes. But
in vibes only.
In vibes only, right? And then the snow stick thing. But I am saying that, like, does this not look to other comedy films? Because, like I kind of said earlier, a lot of comedy just isn't in film right now. It's in other places. It's in playing a video game with your friends. It's on the internet, and it's in... there's this quote that he says that I think Cheslik says here, mascots falling down is a universal language. Everyone thinks that's funny. And it's let's just get back to basics.
Totally.
A lot of comedy isn't in film. I totally 100% agree with you. Like the funniest things, if I want to laugh, I don't watch a movie. And I love movies. We're doing a movie podcast.
Yeah.
But like that's not where I go for my life-affirming comedy right now, with the exception of this movie. But you just also said a lot of comedy isn't on film. The other comedy of this year that I keep going to in my mind, and I think was a really great moment for comedy in film. I didn't see it, but I have good feelings about it. I'm not a hater. But Deadpool and Wolverine is like the other big name in comedy, I would say, for 2024. I mean, made a ton of money, and the Deadpool as a franchise is the comedy action branch of Marvel, which are, like action comedy movies. But even then, the comedy is not in film. The comedy is in dialogue, in your audio track.
Yeah.
And you're not filming the funniest things ever, especially when you're making a studio film, because they want to film the movie and then they want to be able to do reshoots and find the funniest combination of dialogue that lands with the most audiences, which is like, get that bag, but it's not the best way to use film as a medium to make you laugh. And just the other thing you said that was so interesting is like Twilight Princess on the GameCube. The GameCube was in my parents' bedroom. And so if I like really wanted to play Twilight Princess as a kid, I could like sneak in and play it with the volume off.
Yeah.
And I love that game and maybe have never heard it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
beat it, video games are a visual art form as much as film is.
Totally. One thing I want to add, and then we should probably get to summary. But jumping off of what you were talking about, Max, there's a phraseology that popped into my head just now, which is that you were talking about how, like, a video game teaches you how things work and how a movie teaches you how things work. And we talk about a lot in film, the phraseology we use is like, oh, these are the rules of the world. Like, this is the world that we're playing in, right? And taking that around to video game language is really interesting to me. Like, if you look at the opening, it's on my mind right now because it's all over my feed with the new Indiana Jones video game. But, like, it recreates the entirety of, like, the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark. The opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark teaches you the mechanics of that movie. In the same way that games have mechanics, movies have mechanics. These worlds have mechanics. And, like, Raiders teaches you the mechanics of that movie. Of, like, he jumps for the vine and he thinks he's fine, and then the vine starts coming out on him. And it's like, oh, okay, we live in a world where the hero is not James Bond and is not going to get away from everything perfectly. He's going to get out by the skin of his teeth every time. Later in the movie, oh, mechanics of this movie are that if you are presented with a, quick time event of somebody with a giant sword coming at you, you can just shoot him. Like, that encounter can be over. You can just do that. You don't have to do the scripted way through. Right. And I never thought about movies with that phraseology until you just said that. But, like, yeah, movies teach you the mechanics of how the world works, just like a video game has mechanics in its gameplay. And I think this movie in particular is so good at teaching you the mechanics of how it works.
It really is. It really is. And honestly, when I was writing the summary earlier today, I was like, it's basically just a summary of mechanics in a lot of ways and like power creep. Really.
Yeah, truly
is all it is. Yeah. The one last thing I do want to say before we dive in, Parker, did you have any other things from research that you wanted to mention specifically here, or do you think you can sprinkle those in?
I could probably sprinkle them in. The one that I'll mention that Will made allusion to is just on the Reddit thread, somebody asked them, hey, what are some of your inspirations, assuming that Looney Tunes was on there, but like what else? And the first thing he said, he links a Letterboxd list, and he says, Mario Party 3 isn't on Letterboxd, but here are some of the other inspirations.
And he said Mario Party 3 specifically?
Mario Party 3 specifically, which I thought was very fun.
That is my favorite
Mario
Party game.
Yeah, like that's the one. Like, we're so in this sweet spot of just that N64 era adults making
now that
comedy.
I think about it, I'm like pushing a big snowball, and then it gets bigger.
Yep.
That was the height of comedy when I was playing Mario Party 3 as a kid.
I love that minigame.
The two rabbits and the snowman landing in the holes of like the giant bowling ball snowball. That's a Mario Party thing. Like, just land in the holes, You'll be safe. You won't get squished.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of
shadow, like standing somewhere and there being a shadow around you and trying to move out of the way. Like, just a circle of a shadow around a character as something's about to fall on them unless they move.
Yeah.
Is such a video game language.
And also has roots in those, like, shorts, those animated shorts. Right, Parker?
Totally.
Like,
very much so.
This film is so in conversation with every single one of its influences, and yet it feels so fresh, and that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Now that we've gushed about this movie, I do just want to say that Mike Cheslik did say when he was shooting this in the North Woods of Wisconsin with a crew of 4 people, using the same mascot costumes over and over again. He said, when we were shooting, I kept thinking it would be so stupid if this got mythologized. And that's what we're here to do. So I'm
That's what we're here to
sorry
do.
to you, Mike.
The one piece of research I'll give right as we go into research, just because you mentioned the mascots, somebody asked how many they had. They had 6 beavers total, 1 wolf, 1 raccoon, 2 bunnies, 5 dogs, 1 skunk, 1 horse. And that's what they were working with.
That's so dope.
So
And yet
great.
there's hundreds of beavers.
There's
One
hundreds.
last thing I also want to say. I know we keep saying we're going to get into the summary,
we
but it's
can't
going to
keep
go.
doing this.
It's Parker. It's going to go quick
All right, true.
because what we have to recount dialogue, complicated.
We gotta,
scenes.
yeah.
Pardon? Wow. What do you think you meant by that? I do just want to say that something that I've been saying a lot since this movie came out was that this feels like a very kind of a new age of filmmaking, a potential future for filmmaking. And I would say the last time I really felt this was Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Mm-hmm.
That is more of a studio film. That's more, it's a higher budget. It's doing a lot more. But I think that movie also felt like, whoa, are we like doing completely new things now? And I think the Daniels even have come out and said that movie is about what it feels like to be on the internet all the time. That's what it feels like to have your brain plugged into the internet all the time. And I do just want to say that I feel proven right because Daniel Scheinert via Empire Magazine, I think this year, picked Hundreds of Beavers for a poll that they did of like, what's the last time that you went to a theater and you really felt like you were just blown away? And he says, that movie is the key to making theaters fun and is the future of cinema and blew me away. So
Absolutely.
just love that. Just love that, yes, these 2 movies do really feel like we're stepping into something new.
Totally.
With that being said, let's step into something new. The summary. This film opens with the opening musical number, Jean Kayak and his Acme Applejack. I tried to find the exact lyrics today. Still don't know fully, but I have a better idea.
Oh, that's good.
This introduces Jean Kayak, or Jean Kayak, but Jean Kayak, who is an Applejack maker. He owns... Is that what an Acme is? What is an Acme, Parker? It feels like you would know.
And
Acme's nothing.
Acme is nothing. Acme means nothing. Acme was invented. I think the first instance of it is the Chuck Jones Looney Tunes cartoons. It is a stand-in for nothing. It means nothing, and so it is the company they use for everything, and has become, in the same way that like if you want your name taken off a movie, it's like what Alan Smithy is that the fake name of like a director wants to disavow a movie. Acme means nothing.
I knew you'd knew that. Fun little sequence. How do you feel this kind of gets people into the mood of the movie? Do you feel like there's any amount of kind of adjusting of like, okay, I have to get used to how this looks, or do you think it's pretty immediate in this sequence?
No performance is made worse with an overture. And every movie should have one. Because we're going back earlier, but just the short version is we really take film literacy for granted in that every movie is teaching you how to watch it while you're watching it. And not every movie, just the best ones. And in the year where maybe all of the top 10 highest grossing films are going to be sequels, it's nice to spend a little bit of time and be taught for a minute about what you're about to experience. There's something to throwing you right in, and an overture is the best of both worlds of like, it's going to show you everything you're going to see and be very fun to consume. Mm-hmm. Great opening.
It's a great way of putting it. I do like the overture nature of it. And I do think, like, to your question, Max, I think it does a really great job of just dropping you straight in. And I have yet to observe, either in theaters or showing this to friends, any sort of friction from people of not knowing what they're getting into.
Yeah, I totally agree. I really love both of those comments, and I don't think I could have put it better myself. So the whole place blows up because he runs on the barrel and it runs into his house and it blows up.
Because of the beavers.
Trying to describe
because of the beavers.
because of the beavers. trying to describe any part of this movie is going to be nonsense. So then we go into what I've called the initial bunny hunting sequence. He wakes up, it's winter, kind of a corkscrew hat of snow on his head as he comes to life again. Snow. There's a lot of snow. They shot in like negative 15-degree weather to shoot this for like 2 winters during the pandemic, and that's wild.
I hate shooting in the snow. I hate it so much.
And this whole first little sequence, again, we've talked about kind of teaching you how to watch the movie. Also, we're kind of watching, we're almost kind of watching a Let's Play in a sense. In that we were watching this guy figure out, okay, how can I get this rabbit? How can I get this bunny? Parker, you've mentioned before the gag of the food coming over, like the mirage of the food, but it's just a different food item, even though he's looking at an animal that is a food.
Yeah, it's really good. And it's just, again, like, we talk about the humor being all visual, and it is all visual, but there's also, like, there is the expected payoff of a gag, and we get a lot of those in this, but then there's always this sprinkling in of unexpected payoffs of gags that I think really is the flavor of this movie. Of, the first couple times it is foods that, like, are not the foods the animals are, but, like, approximating shapes, right? And then you get to geese, and each one of them is like a pizza slice. They don't look anything like pizza slices, but it's just enjoyable in that way of just always going for what is the funniest, most unexpected payoff.
Yeah, definitely. I also said yesterday a phrase that I wanted to repeat on the show, which is this movie has a lot of what I would say is like cosmic background radiation bits of just like it starts and the mascots are falling constantly throughout the sequence of him figuring out, okay, the rabbits, they go through these holes. I can like block the holes. And there's a lot of falling down. And initially it's funny every single time, like laugh out loud funny, because you're just like, oh, they fell down. And then throughout the rest of the movie, it keeps happening, and it's always funny, but it just kind of leaves a permanent smile on your face rather than like a guffaw every time.
Sure.
But again, just like it introduces this idea of like, we're going to fall down a lot. It's funny every time. And you go, oh man, isn't that going to get exhausting? And it goes, no, eventually it's in the background, and it doesn't make it less funny, but there's just more on top of it. And it just kind of creates a harmony of bits in a way. That's like 3 different metaphors I used in there, but I think that works. Anything to say on this first little sequence until like the master fur trapper and the shop come into play, Will? Do you have anything you want to say about this section of the movie?
It's just, we're not going to really dig very deep narratively other than these first 2 scenes. Like that, it sets us up, and then it's just what's the funniest next 30 seconds from this point on. So shout out to these 2 scenes for being like, here's a guy who had everything and then he lost it all and now he's really hungry. And like that is enough of an engine to get us through the rest of the movie.
Yeah. It is, along those lines, it is crazy to me that, like, we talk about the video game language of this whole thing. This opening sequence is just the opening to a Metroid game. It says, here is what somebody looks like at the height of their powers, and then an explosion happens, and they're back to ground zero.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very well put. So yeah, the master fur trapper, he looks like Santa Claus, and his sleigh is being pulled by people in dog costumes.
Isn't he introduced by God Rest You Merry Gentlemen?
He is, because Kayak sees him at a distance, and it's the sleigh being pulled by 6 dogs, and it's like, God rest you, merry gentlemen.
6 dogs in bondage vests, I might add.
How else would you strap them to the sleigh?
So
They're
good.
Men. And he follows this fur trapper to the shop, correct? And he sees how this works. The shop, as Parker mentioned, is playing video game bizarre music, very specific to that kind of era of Zelda games. You exchange things for other things. That's how shops work. And after that, he gets a little tiny knife because he got 1 fish. Or no, he starts catching fish, gets a coin, gets a tiny little knife that's like a toothpick. And from there, again, it's just kind of that power creep, right? Of just like, okay, you've unlocked a new ability. What are you going to do with it? Learns the ropes. catches some fish, builds a snowman. One of my favorite bits is celebrating that he caught a fish, looking at the snowman next to him, getting a tree, and then it just cuts back to the snowman and his arms are up, like taking the time to do that. It's really funny. I have to hold off on recounting bits from this movie because I won't stop. But yeah, he learns the ropes and he develops a relationship with the shopkeeper's daughter. This whole chunk of the film is a large chunk of it. What stands out to you guys on rewatches, just generally when you think back on it? What is standing out to you both?
I mean, I think that something that I really enjoy about this stretch of the movie is, like Will was talking about, the first two scenes are all the narrative thrust that you need. There is no more storytelling to be done. Other than surprisingly, like the C plot of the Sherlock Holmes and Watson Beavers, which we'll get to. But the rest of this is fully just, okay, what are, like, the most fundamental version of setup and payoff in screenwriting that you can imagine. Of some of these setups are almost instantaneously paid off within the next 30 seconds. Some of these aren't paid off until the end of the movie, but it establishes this language of there is an equation to be figured out within every single scenario that you are presented with, of A plus B equals C. And how do we get there and what does it mean? And now that we have C, we can do C plus B equals D. You know, like we can add and multiply and get to the end of the movie, which is a power fantasy. It is you fully maxing out your stats and, you know, going ham for a while to face off with the final boss. And I just like that this whole stretch is entirely around that. Like, it is about presenting problems and puzzles and figuring out solutions to them in satisfying ways.
I love the promise of the shop and that everything costs like a very visible amount of skins that you know he's going to get there. Because the thing that always stands out to me with the learning the ropes is he's so bad at it. He's so bad at trapping and feelingly never, ever, ever is going to get better. It just is like nonstop failure after failure after failure. And gets me in that, like, it makes me feel like an early Chaplin audience of like, the movie works only if you really think he's going to do it this time. And it just keeps making you feel so dumb in the funnest way because he's never going to do it. And then the fun direction we're heading is that he totally does figure it out and becomes super overpowered. But I love how mean it is to him in this beginning part.
Yeah, totally, definitely. This whole section kind of, talking about how eventually he kind of starts getting there. He manages to catch one raccoon, and he takes the suit. He takes the body back to the shop, and the shopkeeper's daughter like skins it for him. Love the felt organs and the bones of these suits. Like,
good.
Again, just like playing with expectation with these mascots of just like, we know they're mascot suits. When they get cut off, it's foam, it's stuffing, it's like felt
packing
body
peanuts
parts
and
all
but
this,
the
bag of
interior
peanuts.
is always a Spirit Halloween skeleton because they know there's a man inside.
Yes,
like, it's a human skeleton every time.
Yes, but they're like playing with expectation with them in such a fun way.
Yeah.
That feels so playful with the audience of like, we know what this is, and yet also we're going to surprise you with a lot more effort than you think we'd have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just such a fun back and forth with the audience that I really enjoy. Something else I enjoy about this movie, the titles are the act breaks.
Yeah.
Because the titles begin after he gets the raccoon suit, which takes us into Act 2, which is him with the trapper, right?
Mm.
And we don't get the title card until an hour and 15 in, going into the third act. And I didn't catch that it was like basically that specific of like because
Yeah, you're right.
it's funny every time that like the title card comes in an hour and 15 in, but only when reflecting on it for this episode I was like, it's the act breaks.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah, you're totally right.
it's just that's so funny and I love it. But yeah, he falls into that stick trap.
So good.
And like the horror strings there is really fun. The trapper comes and gets him out, and he's training with the trapper. Rather more so just following him and at times pulling the sleigh because the dogs keep getting eaten by wolves. I love, again, just talking about video game mechanics, pulling up your map, like your literal map, pulling it up. It's like, it's fun. It's fantastic. What do you guys think about this whole section where he's kind of going with the master trapper?
Dogs playing poker, I thought would never be funny again. Like, even when this movie does clams, it does them because they are clams.
Yeah.
And not because they think clams are funny.
Right.
And so it is just like they are doing dogs playing poker because they have to.
Yeah.
And until it's the last dog and he is playing solitaire, which is then like, now we've made this actually dogs playing poker. We've done it a new joke in a new, very, very funny way. The oldest joke ever.
I was going to say, yeah, like they play poker and then when it's two, they're playing war. And then at the end it's solitaire. And it's like, again, back and forth with the audience of like, you've seen this before. You think that's the end of the bit. We came up with 6 more following it.
And then the button of like the final dog who gets killed, finding the corpse and the head is missing and there is a blood spray of the cards coming out of his head. Like, it's just a good button on what Will's talking about, like the oldest and lamest joke of dogs playing poker. What is the most unexpected way we can advance that, and how can we plus it, like you're talking about, of solid, poker, war, solitaire.
Yeah.
And jumping ahead just a little bit, but he trades in the poker cards for coins with the shopkeeper, and like that being his way of like, oh, and this is how the dogs died, of just like playing with that association between poker and dogs, to where the shopkeeper sees poker and then first thing he thinks is dogs.
Right. He asks about the dogs, doesn't he, or something?
Oh, it's when that's when he realizes the trapper's dead.
Yeah.
Right.
Which we haven't covered yet, but
yeah,
it becomes a shorthand for the dogs visually.
It's really good.
It's really good. Yeah, the master fur trapper dies as well. The wolves chasing them up the tree. That is one of my favorite visual effects in this movie, is those two scaling that tree and the lightning strike
tree.
And the lightning strike that like changes the lighting of the scene is so genuinely good and interesting.
Yeah.
And I do want to highlight really quick that like obviously this film is made very cheaply, and that like it's very easy to be like, well, this thing looks like shit, but it does in a way that is good. It looks so good for what it is. It looks amazing. And I really liked this one quote that I found here from Cheslik where he said, "We're not camera nerds. We just like images with strong shapes. We like to say shapes are free." Mm-hmm. And I love that. I really enjoy that approach. And I think that it's absolutely right in the pocket of where you want to be with something like this, of like, it doesn't matter what this thing looks like. Obviously, we're going to do black and white to ease that on people, to make it not garish to look at. But ultimately, what matters the most is that the images are interesting and that the shapes are interesting to us and to the audience. And this movie has fantastic shapes in it. So I just wanted to highlight that there.
Totally. That's a good quote.
I like that quote.
I really like it a lot. Yeah, the master fur trapper dies. Another really good gag in this is just him wiping the trapline map clean.
So funny.
It's really good.
Inherits this really detailed map and erases it.
Start over.
Starts over. He starts again. We even get like the video game map like music cue of every time we cut back to him moving from place to place. It's like his little guy is moving, and you get that same little musical riff every time. which is really delightful. Figuring things out. My favorite musical cue in this movie is the one of like the mystery alien cue. It's like, and it's like, what's going on? And I just think that's really funny. This whole part.
It's just the most satisfying thing to watch after like really believing that this guy was gonna fail this whole movie. Just like watching him add a new line onto this map and following it in that very circular I don't know. This is when it switches over from like Mario and like teaching you how to play a game into like the different kind of satisfaction of cookie clicker, of just sheer exponential growth as its own very satisfying thing to watch and experience.
Yeah. It's like this whole section, sticking with the video game metaphor because it is so strong throughout the sinister language you all understand, like this is what it feels like to get like a solid build going. You know, you've got you're doing a deck builder like Balatro and your cards are in synchronization with each other. And like the pure summation of that for me of this whole stretch of the movie is, you know, so we get, you know, jumping in a little bit to the summary portion, is during the sequence we get the introduction of kind of our C plot of the Sherlock Holmes and Watson Beavers, which are two of, like, I love this bit so much. Again, like, consistently gets a laugh the first time they show up, and consistently, like, both in the theater and with our friends, audibly heard somebody, oh, they're going to keep coming back. Like the second or third time they showed up, that wasn't just a one-off gag, and realizing that was going to be important. But like just them coming in and finding all the evidence. The one scene in this section that really drives that kind of deck builder metaphor home for me is when they come across his like death trap wind turbine that's just like there's a circular motion of dozens of beavers in this thing, and they look horrified and Watson throws up. But it's just like, yeah, he's optimized his build. He doesn't even have to work for these kills anymore. They just come to him.
The thing that most strongly evokes for me always is when you always think it's going to be fun to start a Minecraft server with your friends, and then you can't play for 2 days, and you get back on, and your friend has built 300 by 300 block redstone traps to harvest and like spawn golems and kill them and harvest them for their iron, and it has become like a redstone industrial farming trap.
Absolutely. It's I called this section of the film in the summary the industrial era, because this is when he gets to the industrial era. I do want to just say that this isn't something they could have been really referencing, I suppose, but Tears of the Kingdom this year, using the Zelda metaphor, has this horror element to it of like you open Twitter and you see people's builds in that game, and it's like you can just build a plane that lasers the boss, like, yeah. And that's what this is. He's gone from like Ocarina of Time to Tears of the Kingdom. I have a nuclear bomb.
Death traps.
I have death traps I've built, and it's really funny, and it's a very I like what you're saying. Oh, you mentioned, Parker, about people being like, oh, they're coming back, because this is where the movie really starts to be like, we're leaving this thread that you might be like, I have no idea where this is going, and then where it's going is so funny in and of itself.
Yeah.
And we're watching the beavers for it, all of this movie, but especially this sequence with the cyclical nature. Like, we are watching the beavers. We know they're going somewhere, but this is when you're seeing that they are building a megalith.
Yeah.
In the
Tower
distance.
of Babel.
And it's you're enjoying the satisfaction of him getting more powerful, and you are getting promised so much more about this relationship between Jean Kayak and the beavers, which the beginning of this is just, he's hungry, he needs to eat, all the way to like he needs to make a little bit of money to get a little bit nicer tools.
Yeah.
To like now we are setting up a scale that is truly galactic.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, now you like to your point, Will, it is so clearly objective based of survival, money, romance, right? Like he is
Yes.
told to kill hundreds of beavers so that he could marry the shopkeeper's daughter.
Yes, which I forgot to mention when I said the title card, because that's such a good build up to that reveal of the title card of like, this is where it's going. He now has a new objective, which is turn in hundreds of beavers, get the engagement ring to marry the shopkeeper's daughter. What were you going to say, Will?
Oh, and there's just this double nature to it of like, it doesn't stop at marry the shopkeeper's daughter, because that even becomes this thing secondary in your mind.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
in Jean Kayak's mind, but for the audience, it does something at some point where the beavers stop being the objective and start being the capital TBG, the bad guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They become the empire at some point where like everything that a beaver does is evil and everything Jean Kayak does is good, and it becomes a good versus evil conflict.
Right.
Yeah,
it's really
totally.
good.
Like they do fully become stormtroopers to the point that you are like, you know, they do such a good job in the opening half of this movie of playing on your sympathies of, oh, these are cute animals costumes, to the point of having like two baby bunnies with giant eyes and immediately smash cut to him cooking them for dinner. And like you feel bad for the animals, but by the end of this, you're right. Like it is the level of, you know, cheering at the holdover maneuver, the holdo maneuver, in
The holdover
you know,
maneuver.
The holdover
is when
yeah, the
Paul
Paul
Giamatti
Gi-
breaks his arm.
That's when Paul Giamatti throws a lot of meditations by Marcus Aurelius at the Empire.
You
But
thought
just
you were
like-
gonna get away with that one.
No,
for a
I thought
second.
I thought I could slip through.
We all sprang for what is the holdover maneuver. It's skating in Boston.
It's
It
skated
would
in
have been my
Boston,
take.
actually. But just like cheering when one starship smashes into 5 others, knowing that thousands of people just died, but they're stormtroopers, so it's cool and it's fun.
Actually, Parker, my reaction to that was no, just kidding.
Don't do this.
I
It
had
actually doesn't-
mentioned, like, it's not visually referencing a lot of movies, but this third act is so strongly referencing Star Wars visually and that Death Star sequence, and even the sounds of the Death Star, like the very THX 1138 like mumble. You know how George Lucas started mumblecore with his like weird
Yeah.
robot
exactly.
sounds.
Yeah, the first
Mumblecore.
Mumblecore artist.
I really enjoy listening to Mumble.
Totally.
And there's they do the Return of the Jedi speeder bike sequence.
Yes, they do.
Shot for shot.
Another specific movie reference they make here that makes me very happy is that on their list of movies that inspired them is Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro. And like the whole water entrance sequence of this is just ripped straight from that, of just swimming up waterfalls and through gears, through this water main and windmill. And I was like, yes!
Yeah, quick shout out to animation. Just
Animation,
like this
baby.
movie is video games and it's animation and it's
Most
the
of their
internet,
Letterboxd list are animated films, which I think is
which is great. And this is a live action cartoon. The next item on my summary is just horse.
So funny.
Just felt like that needed a mention.
great. Shout out to the horse.
Shout out to the horse. That man's face is fantastic. Also,
I like that you did right next smoking out the beavers and wolves, like they have this huge blunt rotation.
he's got to get on top of that. Got to smoke him under the table.
I actually meant to write out smoking the beavers and wolves.
Outsmoking
He's
the
like
beavers.
my
yeah.
next goal. Outsmoke them.
Yeah.
Also, we haven't mentioned it all yet. The Native American trapper who's here as well.
Yes.
And their relationship is very fun for when he appears, of getting snowshoes and that sort of thing. But this all kind of culminates in that, right? Of like he tricks an army of beavers into going into the wolf cave, and then traps them inside, and they all
with the skunk and they gas
the
him to
skunk,
death,
and
burn him
they-
alive.
yeah, and it is like the most like final kind of moment in this whole section. And then he takes his hundreds of beavers back to the shop, and then he doesn't, because it's a false shop cardboard cutout which got such a big laugh from all of our friends yesterday. And the button on it, it was
the second cutout.
The second cutout is really good. Love that. This has a really big like when you watch this, you're like, oh shit, like the stakes are high now. Like it feels genuine because then he is this where he goes to infiltrate the beaver tower of Babel?
Yeah, he just
right?
he's because they take all of his beaver pelts and he's like, okay, we're going in.
Right. So he goes in. Parker, do you want to mention the thing that you mentioned while we were watching yesterday? The thing that you really love about this sequence?
I don't remember which one
cutouts,
it was.
The cutouts of the sconces.
Oh, just the battlements of their fortress are just beaver faces, and there are always two beavers at each outpost, and they make the pupils of the eyes, and they just do fun, silly stuff with that, and it makes me very happy.
Yeah. Cagliostro. This sequence feels like it was kind of made for Parker Rawlins in a way.
Absolutely.
With Cagliostro into Mario Party 3, fighting your way into the fortress. Anything to say before we get to the trial? Anything to say about this sequence?
Not especially. I think we've about covered it.
It's just good Mario Party 3 fun.
Yeah.
Really good. Yeah, so then he doesn't manage to get. Oh, he has a brief moment where he almost drinks from the giant Applejack barrel. But he doesn't. He manages to.
And somebody in our group yesterday said, "I didn't know this movie was going to have like a message. I didn't know this movie would have themes."
You have to give up your vices if you want to achieve what you want in life. I guess.
It is this little moment that's not even out of place or wrong, but he is like, you do realize like he's not gone just from riches to rags, but is like acknowledging and growing past alcoholism in this like really funky little moment that is not beating you over the head or like super out of place or forced in any way. But it might as well be in there because it is a really heroic moment.
Totally.
Yeah. And it's also setting up another really good little joke that we don't even see coming because you think that it is just this really nice moment, and it is. And again, this movie is just really self-sustaining was the term that I used when I saw this in theaters. This movie is unbelievably sustainable in what it's doing. It's wild. There's a trial, beaver lawyers and a beaver jury and a beaver judge, and it's so...
And a beaver public defendant.
And again, just like the performance of these beavers, and we haven't really touched on it at all, but the people in the 6 people in these mascot suits or what have you are doing really great nonverbal communication of like speech and action. And like this movie wouldn't work nearly as well if there wasn't just this sense of like playfulness in every moment of the mascots like movements, right? It's really funny. Really the trial's just really good. I mean, Jacques, we did skip over pardon, but he says pardon at one point. That's the only really spoken line other than Jacques in this movie. Jacques. And then the brawl is
best scene in the movie.
It's the best scene in the movie. And
truly.
He wakes up on a table with a giant buzzsaw underneath it. Very Bond-esque kind of torture sequence. That is James Bond, not just bondage. And they make clear they are going to make a coat out of him. The master fur trapper comes back and then is revealed to be a suit that they're wearing. And he... Parker, do you want to... Does someone want to break down how he manages to escape and what the reaction is?
Take it, Will.
My goodness. So he learns... It is this moment where he realizes that he's become a trapper and knows how to tie knots inside and out, that he can sort of will the knots off of his body through this knowledge that he's acquired with the math meme, the equations meme going on over his face. And then just John Wicks his way through this room where they're using all 6 beaver costumes and killing some of those beavers and bringing in the replacements so we can just keep going. My favorite bit in the entire movie is when he grabs the beaver by the throat and punches its head off, and it has the skeleton underneath, and he rips the body off, and he just like, this is when we've gone from fur trapper to like, it's that moment when Goku first goes Super Saiyan, like that level of like, we have transcended human capability, knowledge, and power.
It's Neo in the Matrix. It's Goku. It's all of those. My favorite moment in the film, because of the reaction it gets every time, and I'm fascinated by this, is when he disappears for a moment, because they all put him back down on the table, and then they come up, and there's just a beaver on the table, and they look where he is. He pops up, he smokes a cigarette, and he hits the lever, and the buzzsaw comes up through the beaver and cuts it in half, and fluff goes everywhere. And every time the audience watching go, oh! And it's like
crazy,
it's fluff. We know it's a beaver suit. We know it's not what it is, and yet we're so in on everything.
It feels like a John Wick kill
that we literally go like, oh yeah, it's.
It would be too much for John Wick.
It would be.
It's
like
whoa,
it's like a chest burster in Alien.
Yeah, it's Jason Voorhees.
It's Terrifier. It's these like brutal slasher kills.
It might be like the cabin setting of it all. Like that room is made out of wood because it's a beaver dam, but like it feels so Evil Dead 2 to me in such a great way, you know?
Totally.
Like it just it feels, here is slapstick terrifying body horror essentially of just, again, if this was anything other than beaver costumes and fluff, it would be too much for any of these franchises, but they do it here and it's just so great. My favorite, like, if I had to pick a bit from the movie, I do think my favorite bit, just because it tickles my editor brain, is a beaver stands off and he's holding a jackknife. And instead of, like, tossing it between hands, they just do jump cuts of it going from one hand to the other and putting a little sound effect.
You know that they tried to shoot it.
They tried to shoot it and it didn't work.
He can't use his hands and, like, just try to be funny. And then they go with the backup and it's funnier.
The backup is funnier.
This scene is gold. This is like everything that the movie's been doing has gotten us to this point. And I made this point to Parker yesterday when we watched it, but just like everything up to this point has been compositing. It's been compositing in Hundreds of Beavers or what have you. There's been every single shot in this movie has an effects shot in it, right? And this sequence definitely also has effects shots in it. But it's fascinating to me that, like, the action climax of this movie, in a way, and we get back to the zany, like, compositing, you know, there's a morph suit of beavers making a kaiju in this movie. But this is kind of like the gold moment, and they strip it back to, let's just do an over-the-top brawl sequence in this one room with the 6 costumes we have. And it's, like, the exact inverse of what big studio blockbuster making is right now, which is... let's use a bunch of effect shots leading up to, and then the climax is just a big CGI gray mush that we don't really care about. Mm-hmm. And this movie is saying, what if everything in this movie was really kind of composited together until this moment in which it's just a brawl and isn't that so exciting? And it is. He escapes. He sees that the giant keg of Applejack that he was going to drink from earlier is actually the rocket that the Beavers have built. They're going to space.
It's such a crazy, no part of this, because they show the reveal of like all the weird little, you know, like mystery alien noise moments, experiments, but the reveal of what they're building is just so, like, in a movie that is so far out of left field and everything. It's like, oh, they were building a rocket this whole time. Like, that's just so funny.
There was like a D plot of like, what are the Beavers up to? Like, we know they're building this Tower of Babel, but why? And now we know. He escapes. You get a Titanic joke. You get him going, oh, duh, which is really good.
Yeah.
And then we get what we alluded to earlier, and I just had so much joy even just writing toboggan speeder bike chase, because there's just the speeder chase from Return of the Jedi in this movie. It's really funny.
It's so good. Again, just like not using the it's the same thing with the music, and like Will mentioned this earlier too, but like the music and the sound effects used in this movies are never, it's not the bizarre music from Ocarina of Time. It's not the speeder bike sound effect, but it is how you remember those things sounding.
I love that you said that. Absolutely. That is totally what it is. For this movie, they imagined something reminiscent of childhood with snowball fights and sled chases. And I think looking at their influences on this, that absolutely pulls in. And it does kind of, I think you're absolutely right. It's like a subjective memory of what those things sounded and felt like. And we're seeing it here. It doesn't have to be exactly that. You're totally right. I just adore this whole section. The beavers make a big kaiju, and they run after him. Rocket gets knocked. Oh, that's how he escapes. Is the rocket gets knocked askew, and then he's running from hundreds of beavers. Rocket goes up. I do love the Native American trapper's hero moment in this movie. Well, first he gets on the horse. Oh, man. And then chases after, and then he shoots an arrow and swings the rocket back. It's genuinely affecting watching him do this. Like, it's really good.
Yeah.
Would you guys agree with that? That it's
Absolutely.
like genuinely like an emotional punch of just like, hell yeah. Rocket comes back, gets knocked down. Massive explosion. Hundreds of roasted beavers start falling from the sky. Jean at this point has Mario Party ran on a snowball to the shop, comes down,
and he has he has like the full setup and payoff of the movie is that the movie opened with him on top of this barrel drunk and not knowing how to stop it, and it ran into his shop and it all blew up, and he flashes back to that moment. He says, oh, I know how to fix this now. Like he puts the brakes on the snowball so it doesn't run over the shop. And it's like, there you go. You learned the lesson from the first mistake of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
All comes around. Cyclical.
It's like poetry. It rhymes. And goes in for the kiss with the daughter because they're going to get married. And then the shopkeeper comes in, kisses him, but not really. He was passing the chewing tobacco. And I mean, it's up there for best title, like end title cards, right?
It's really the little spittoon.
Little spittoon. It says the end on the other side.
It's good. It's really
good movie.
Good movie.
It is a good movie.
Yeah.
I had the crisis just thinking about this that I'm sure you guys have every week where I was like, and there's going to be a point where we're going to have to compare it to Citizen Kane and just like, what are we doing anymore?
See, I fully came prepared for this. I've been thinking about this, and I have a stance to take. I am so ready for this criteria.
While we were talking, I really clicked. I'm rocking. I'm ready to rock. Let's do it.
All right. So who wants to get us started here?
Okay, so let's start with historical and technical relevance. So I'm going to take a big swing here. I genuinely think, and I know this wasn't like Max, you can speak more to like the historical, perception and reception of the movie at the time. But like the way we talk about Citizen Kane of like, oh, this was the start of everything. This revolutionized filmmaking. It is too soon to tell right now, but I firmly believe there's a very real chance Hundreds of Beavers could be talked about this way of like the Citizen Kane of digital filmmaking. This is what you can do in your backyard with 4 people and a tiny scrap of money. Like I genuinely think, I was telling Will this beforehand of like watching this movie, I suddenly felt like I fully understood the kind of vision of the future George Lucas was trying to achieve by pushing the industry from film stock to digital. The prequels don't work on that level because it's like, well, George, you are the richest man on earth. You could build every single one of these sets and you'd be fine, but instead you did shitty green screen and it looks weird and it looks bad. But his idea of, oh, we don't have to build sets. We can create anything we want with the use of this digital technology. This movie is it is the fulfillment of that promise to me. in a big way. And I think that there is a very real possibility that this movie could well be considered a Citizen Kane level of cinematic revolution.
I completely agree with you. 100%. I think this movie could be a turning point in the way that everyone thinks about movies being made, in a way that gives more power, creativity, distribution options, financial business models to the smallest levels of filmmaking, and will potentially be that first film in an entire chapter of a textbook.
Yeah. I am in complete agreement with you both. Parker, just kind of to build off of what you were saying, just like, yeah, see, now I had it and now it's gone, which makes for really interesting listening, I know. But really, truly, for years, people have been saying, a celebrity goes on The Tonight Show, and he goes, what would you have to say to people who want to make movies out there? And he goes, well, you can do it now. Pick up your phone and start filming. I wish I had that when I was your age. And it always rings hollow.
Yeah.
Because these are people who are in the industry, oftentimes people who have been there for years or have a relative who's been in there for years, and they say, you can make a movie just like the one I make. And that's not actually true. Even when Steven Soderbergh shoots a snowball fight on an iPhone, they have like an adapter to use like a full
$800,000 lenses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first movie that genuinely makes me go, yeah, you can do this.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Because it's being presented as a movie. There are a lot of people out there who use YouTube. You think about like the reanimated trend that people do for entire movies.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, yeah, that's amazing. And we're doing that to recreate films. This is a movie that is like, has the internet YouTube kind of filmmaking approach of like, let's do it in our backyard, and yet is being put toward a genuine like cinematic vision, not trying to meet any criteria of being online, of trying to get views on YouTube, trying to do this. It is saying, no, people are saying that we can do this. George Lucas prophesied this 20 years ago, like people keep saying you can pick up your phone and do it. Let's do it. But we don't have to use the phone, because actually you can just use this camera and spend 1 billion hours and 6 years making this thing come true.
Yeah.
And it is, like you guys both said at the top of this episode, one of the most artistically inspiring films I've ever seen. It feels similar in a sense that Citizen Kane also had to be toured around at first, roadshow style, because RKO didn't want to release it initially. This movie presents what I think could be a blueprint for distribution, for film craft, and for an entirely new chapter in the textbook, like you said, Will. So I'm right there with you guys. I genuinely think, more so than when we said this about Puss in Boots, Parker, where we were like, yeah, Puss in Boots is part of this movement in animation that's happening, and we technically give that credit to Spider-Verse.
Right.
This movie feels like, no, this is it. This is where new things start, and this is a mark of a new era in filmmaking.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
And so, like, to that point, like, I think we've all done a good job of saying our piece about it, and I think we fully stand in that opinion very strongly. With that said, we're not at the point where we know that for sure yet, so I think the point still goes to Kane, but there is a giant asterisk of, like, come back to me in 10 years, and, like, I think we will fully be able to give this point to Hundreds of Beavers.
I disagree.
Really?
Because we well, okay, maybe I don't.
No, go for it. Come on.
Well, I don't know. Let's get to the end of this. I think what I was really going to say has more to do with the conclusion.
Okay.
But okay, we can give this point to Kane. Yes, because we have proof.
Yeah, I feel good about that.
Okay, I agree. Will, you
That's
agree?
Fair.
Okay.
How well is this movie doing what it's trying to do?
11 out of 10.
Yeah, flawlessly, right? Like,
yeah. Parker, you have one gripe with this movie.
My only issue with this movie, like, it always sits at 4.5 instead of 5, which is just that I find that there's a little bit of a pacing lull right after the Master Fur Trapper has died, where it feels like we are back to learning mode, which I feel like we already did. And once we get back to like the shopkeeper and, you know, he knows that the Master Fur Trapper's gone, and like we focus, like there are other things that grab our attention more, but there's like a little 10 to 15 minute stretch in here that loses me ever so slightly. But in the same way we've talked about, like, it's still being, you know, other movies we've talked about with issues we have still being flawless movies, I still firmly believe this is a flawless movie, even with my little personal gripe.
And I'm right there with you. So we do think this is doing what it's trying to do flawlessly, 11 out of 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
Point to Beavers.
So because Will, I know that you love Citizen Kane.
I am a big old fan of that flick. Hey guys, Citizen Kane, good movie.
Good movie.
Maybe we don't say that enough on this show, so thank you for saying that, Will. Genuinely, do you? So just to confirm, Will, you do also think that this movie is doing what it's trying to do better than how Citizen Kane is doing it? Maybe.
Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. Just wanted to check in. Okay. Do we emotionally connect with it? Do we like it?
2 big old thumbs up.
Yeah, I'm thinking I like the movie.
I like it very much. I like it. I was trying not to, I was like, what can I say that wouldn't even be mean? If like, I like this more than I like most things and people.
Yeah.
It makes me feel good when I'm around it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so criteria says yes. Taking a step back, objectively, do we think this is better than Citizen Kane? Will, let's start with you.
You know, when we do that, that's it's like
that's when we realize we're using cartoon avatars
mean?
on video.
What does any of this mean?
What are we doing? But like, is it better than Citizen Kane? The way that I'm going to get to this answer is that Citizen Kane at one point maybe was the movie that you would tell your students in a film class to go watch if they want to learn how to make a movie. And this last semester, I told my students to watch Hundreds of Beavers instead, and they made way better movies at the end of the semester. And they learned how to make film and to do visual storytelling so effortlessly just by watching this movie. And I think that's better. I think Citizen Kane, this is in that sweet spot where Citizen Kane rules so hard and connects with almost nobody. And this movie rules so hard and connects with almost everybody. So I'm cool with it being better than Citizen Kane legitimately.
Okay. I'd like to first say I love how you put that, Will. I really love how you say that, because oftentimes I'm usually the one who, when we get to this part of the show, I go, why do we do this? And I get a headache and I go, oh no. And Barker has to be like, Max, it's the show. But genuinely, the conceit of this show is that Citizen Kane is a benchmark in filmmaking. It's one of the greatest films ever made, and it came out 80 years ago. And the thesis of this show is surely in 80 years, other movies have earned that title of one of the greatest films of all time, if not the greatest. And I think that, Will, you just put that so succinctly of the lessons you can learn from Citizen Kane are there. They are there for sure. But in an age where the internet exists, where kids are playing more video games than they are watching movies that are comedies or movies generally, when people are spending more time on TikTok than they are going to the theater, I think that this movie is a modern revelation of, you want to learn how to make movies in the modern era? Oh, and you're a first-time filmmaker, you don't actually have the support of a studio? Watch Hundreds of Beavers. then go back and watch Citizen Kane once you have more of more ground beneath your feet, because it's worth looking at film history. It's worth watching Citizen Kane, but this is a great film to watch for anyone to learn anything about visual storytelling.
Yeah. I really.
I thought you were just gonna be like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the.
Oh, I mean, it's about what I'm gonna say, because I think you two have put it so eloquently and so well, and just I would fully agree. Like, to Will's point, like I'm doing a history of film class next semester, and I'm fully planning on putting this in for like the digital cinema component. Like, the week we talk about digital cinema, we're watching this movie, because it is. I think if you were going to teach new filmmakers how to make the kinds of films they want to make at the scale they want to make, right? Because, like, to your point, and we'll wrap this up, but like, to your point of what you were talking about, Max, that disingenuous answer you get from the talk show visits of like, just go out and make something and you can make anything. I'm like, yeah, but that it just rings so hollow, because the resources aren't there, and the kind of stories that so many of us want to tell are locked behind resource doors, right? It's like, yeah, I guess I could make a movie about me and my roommates' lives, but I would like to make a slapstick comedy with lots of beavers, and I can't do that right now because I don't have access to that. Well, you do, and you can. And like, this movie is the proof of concept for every indie low-budget filmmaker in the world, and has like actively been a major talking point for Will and I as we move the rest of our creative careers forward as the Aud Brothers, of just like, okay, this is an text and has got a fire under our ass of, we can make that. How do we do that in the next 3 years? And to all of the points that you guys have said and everything we have talked about, I feel firmly in the camp that I think that this is better than Citizen Kane. And unlike the hemming and hawing that is experienced sometimes, and I get it sometimes too, and I like Citizen Kane a lot. I do think it is a great movie. I also just have no problem punching down on it. I really don't. It's not punching down. It is punching. I am punching up. I am punching up on the greatest film of all time, according to everybody else. It can take it.
Citizen Kane's like, no, Parker, no.
Stop being mean to me.
I'm just a little guy.
Yeah. So every time Max gets worried about like, what are we doing? I'm like, it's Citizen Kane. He can take it. I'll be the bad guy. I'll be the villain in your history.
Wonderful.
What were you saying, Will?
I said, that's a good point.
That's a good point. All right, Will, would you like to say it?
Yeah, I think, Will, you should
The
say...
closing prayer?
No, you the final statement. You get to say out loud.
I get to say it, that Hundreds of Beavers is better than Citizen Kane.
Yes, you do. There
it is. There it is.
Feels good to say it.
You heard it from the beaver,
but it felt good
scary.
to say it.
Felt good. And folks, you've heard it from the bunny, the beaver, and the raccoon's mouths.
We weren't going to talk about it, Parker. Go check out the YouTube video if you want to know what we looked like this whole time.
Yeah. Thanks so much,
Thank you, everybody,
Will,
for listening, and thank you so much, Will, for being here.
Yeah, thanks,
it's
guys.
lovely to have you.
Will, we love having you here.
I'll be back.
See you again in a year. Max, do you want to tell the listeners? Yeah, probably less. Do you want to tell the listeners what we're doing next time?
Next time we will be wrapping this season, or rather this year, of Better Than Citizen Kane with 1970s Scrooge.
A favorite of yours.
A favorite of mine, and I'll have things to say. So yeah, everyone tune in next time for that. Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks so much, guys.
Support independent film. Okay. Bye.
Bye.